If you don't like living with us, leave." Those words came out of my daughter-in-law's mouth while she lounged in my kitchen, sipping from the porcelain cup I had bought in Italy years ago. She said it so casually, as if she wasn't living rent-free in my $3 million estate. She looked at me with that smug smile, like I was the unwelcome guest in my own home. I didn't argue. Instead, I calmly reached into my cardigan pocket and made sure the small recorder I had slipped inside earlier was running. That single line, dripping with arrogance, was going to be my starting point. My name is Lillian Monroe, 67 years old, retired teacher, widow, and owner of a home that my late husband and I worked our entire lives to build. This house was supposed to be my sanctuary, my safe place. Yet here I was, standing in the middle of my own kitchen, being told to leave by someone who had contributed nothing but chaos and entitlement. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below if you want to hear more. Grandma life stories filled with emotion, betrayal, and unexpected strength. It had been 9 long months since my son Ethan and his wife Savannah moved in. At first it was supposed to be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. Ethan had lost his job, and Savannah said they needed a few weeks to sort things out. Weeks turned into months, and months turned into the nightmare I was now living in. They weren't paying a dime for utilities, not a cent for food, and not a single bill for maintenance. Everything fell on me, the same way it always had. I tried to convince myself it was only a rough patch. I told myself that as a mother, I should support my son. But every day Savannah grew bolder, taking ownership of my space as if it had always been hers. She ordered expensive furniture online with my credit card, filled the driveway with delivery vans bringing in designer handbags, and hosted her friends for champagne evenings on my patio. Ethan sat by quietly, shoulders hunched, always avoiding my eyes. On that morning, I was preparing a simple breakfast: oatmeal, tea, nothing fancy. Savannah waltzed into the kitchen, silk robe flowing, phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing with a friend about her last trip to the Bahamas. When she hung up, she turned to me, gave me that cold little smile, and dropped the line that cut straight to the bone. "If you don't like living with us, leave." The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My fingers tightened around the spoon in my hand. I wanted to scream, to remind her whose name was on the deed, whose sweat and years had built this place. But I stayed calm. I had already learned that reacting only gave her more power. Instead, I pressed the spoon down gently, set it on the counter, and smiled back at her. "You want me to leave?" I asked, my voice steady. "Interesting." Savannah shrugged as if it was nothing, and reached for the fresh strawberries I had just washed. She popped one into her mouth and leaned against the marble counter. "Well, no one is forcing you to stay, Lillian. If it's too much for you, pack your things. We'll manage just fine." "We." That word stung. She had woven herself around my son so tightly that he barely spoke anymore. Ethan shuffled in just then, hair unkempt, eyes still foggy from sleep. He didn't even look at me when Savannah said, "Your mom's upset again. Maybe she's tired of us." He scratched his head, muttered something about needing coffee, and sat down without a word. I looked at him, my only child, and wondered how I had raised a man so willing to stand by while his wife dismantled the dignity of his mother. The hurt twisted inside me, but at that moment I also felt a wave of resolve. I was done being quiet. I was done being treated like I was invisible in my own home. I excused myself and walked down the hallway to the guest room Savannah had practically claimed as her own dressing suite. The scent of her expensive perfume clung to the air, and designer clothes were strewn everywhere. I picked up one of her oversized suitcases from the closet and pulled it onto the bed. My hands moved with a strange calmness as I began folding her silk blouses one by one. If she thought I was going to pack my bags, she was in for a surprise. I was packing hers. Behind me, I heard her sharp voice rising. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned to face her, my hands still resting on the suitcase. "You told me to leave if I didn't like it here, so I'm helping you make it easier. You can start your new life elsewhere." Her face twisted, eyes flashing with fury. "You're insane, completely insane." "Ethan!" she screeched. Her voice echoed down the hall, summoning him like a spell. Ethan appeared in the doorway, eyes darting between us. He looked at me, then at the suitcase, and then back at Savannah. His mouth opened, but before he could speak, Savannah shoved past him, yanking her phone from the pocket of her robe. Her tone shifted instantly from rage to a trembling desperation, her voice cracking as if she had rehearsed it 100 times. 911, please, I need help, she sobbed. My mother-in-law, she's having a breakdown. She's unstable. Please send someone quickly. I froze for a heartbeat, not because I believed her act, but because I realized just how far she was willing to go. She wasn't just playing the spoiled daughter-in-law anymore. She was trying to paint me as unfit, unstable, and dangerous in my own home. I stood tall, my hands steady, my eyes locked on her as she wept into the phone with her crocodile tears. I knew the police would be here in minutes, but I also knew one thing she didn't. The recorder in my pocket was capturing everything. And when the doorbell rang, and I heard the heavy steps of officers approaching my home, I whispered to myself, "This is not the beginning of my end. This is the beginning of hers." The knock on the door was louder than thunder, and within seconds, 2 uniformed officers stepped into my foyer. Savannah rushed forward, clutching her robe dramatically, as if she were a victim in some soap opera. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried, her voice shaking in practiced terror. "My mother-in-law, she's not well. She's been acting erratically, threatening me. I was terrified." I stood back, arms folded, my heartbeat steady. I knew better than to interrupt her show. Let her speak, I thought. Let her dig her own hole deeper. Ethan hovered in the background, wringing his hands, torn between his wife's performance and his own uneasy conscience. One of the officers turned to me. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I nodded calmly. "Quite all right, officer. Would you like some tea? I just brewed a pot." The officer blinked, caught off guard by my composure. Savannah's eyes narrowed, and I could almost see the fury bubbling beneath her fake tears. She hadn't expected me to be so calm. They questioned me briefly, asked if I had taken any medication, if I had been feeling confused. I answered every question clearly, even reciting the date and time without hesitation. I saw the officer exchange a quick glance with his partner. The seed of doubt had been planted. When they left with nothing to act on, Savannah slammed the door behind them and turned on me. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat. "This isn't over." She stormed upstairs, and Ethan followed meekly, like a shadow tethered to her command. The silence that settled after they left was almost comforting. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and let the anger roll over me. But underneath the anger was something stronger, resolve. That afternoon, my neighbor Gloria came by to return a gardening book I had lent her. She was a kind woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed and honest. As soon as she stepped inside, she lowered her voice. "Lillian, I've been noticing things. Your daughter-in-law, she's been talking to people who don't seem right. Men in expensive cars pulling up, hushed conversations at odd hours." I nodded slowly, unsurprised. "She thinks I don't see. But I see everything." Gloria leaned closer. "Be careful. I think she's planning something bigger than just freeloading." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the halls of my estate, touching the walls that held memories of my husband, of the life we had built. I would not let Savannah tear that down. I paused at Ethan's old room, now stripped bare, and thought about the boy who used to bring me daisies from the yard. Where had he gone? How had he turned into this silent, obedient man chained to a woman's ambition? The following morning, I found the clue I had been waiting for. On the dining table, half hidden under a stack of shopping catalogs, was a set of papers. My name was written across the top, alongside the property address. My stomach tightened as I scanned the contents. They were using my estate, my husband's legacy, my home, as collateral for a massive loan. The numbers leapt off the page, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt they had no intention of paying back. I pressed my hand against the polished oak table, steadying myself. They weren't just disrespecting me. They were plotting to strip me of everything I had left. My estate wasn't just a house. It was my dignity, my independence, my final proof that my life's work mattered. When Savannah entered the room, her phone glued to her ear as usual, I folded the papers neatly and held them up. "Interesting choice of collateral," I said evenly. Her eyes flickered with shock before she smirked. "Oh, that! Don't worry, Lillian. It's just paperwork. Nothing you need to bother yourself with. Ethan and I are handling everything." Ethan trailed in behind her, his expression guilty but resigned. He couldn't even look at me. I felt my chest tighten with grief for the son I thought I knew, but I forced myself to stay strong. Savannah leaned closer, her perfume choking the air. "You've had a good run, but times change. Maybe it's time you let go and let us manage things. You're old, Lillian. You should be grateful we're here to take care of you." Her words cut, but they also lit a fire inside me. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not with fear, but with quiet determination. She thought she had me cornered, but she had underestimated me. I excused myself, slipping the papers into my pocket, and walked out into my garden. The roses were blooming, their red petals glowing in the late morning sun. I inhaled deeply, letting the fragrance steady me. Savannah saw an old woman. But what she didn't see was the woman who had built this life brick by brick, who had raised a child on her own after losing her husband, who had taught generations of students to fight for their worth. I would not be erased. I would not be discarded. And I was far from done. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, as I often did. Years of teaching had trained me to rise early, and even in retirement, my body never forgot. I brewed myself a pot of tea and sat by the window, watching the sun stretch across the garden. For a brief moment, the house felt like mine again, quiet and filled with peace. But the footsteps above reminded me that peace was a luxury I no longer had. By the time I walked into the kitchen, Savannah was already there, lounging with her tablet, sipping a cappuccino she hadn't made herself. Ethan shuffled in a few minutes later, shoulders slumped, looking like he hadn't slept well. I decided it was time. "I think it's time for the two of you to find another place to live," I said, my voice steady but firm. "This arrangement has gone on long enough." Ethan froze mid-step, his eyes darting toward his wife. Savannah didn't even blink. She simply tilted her head, lips curling into a sly smile. "You want us to leave?" she asked, her tone dripping with false innocence. "Funny, you can leave any time you like. No one's keeping you here." Her words struck like a slap. This was my house, my estate, yet she had twisted reality so thoroughly that she dared to suggest I was the intruder. Ethan remained silent, eyes fixed on the floor. My heart ached seeing him like that, a man reduced to a shadow, too afraid to contradict his wife. I leaned against the counter, keeping my composure. "This is my home, Savannah. My name is on the deed. I built this life with my husband. You've contributed nothing. I'm asking you both to respect that and move out." She let out a short laugh, the kind that was sharp enough to cut. "Respect? You think you deserve respect just because you're old and own a house? Times have changed, Lillian. You either adapt or step aside." Her words settled like poison in the air. Ethan's silence was even worse than her cruelty. He didn't defend me, didn't defend himself. He just sat at the table, stirring sugar into his coffee as if none of this concerned him. I turned away before the tears in my eyes could fall. I would not let her see me break. Not anymore. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the family photographs on the wall. Ethan as a boy, smiling wide with a missing front tooth. Ethan at graduation, standing tall in his cap and gown. My late husband had taken that photo, his hand on my shoulder as we watched with pride. How had we ended up here, with our son too weak to protect what we had built? I stepped into the living room, my decision made. If Savannah thought I was the one who needed to leave, she was about to be proven wrong. I went straight to the coat closet and pulled out one of the oversized suitcases she had brought when she first moved in. The bright pink tag on the handle screamed her name, almost mocking me. I dragged it to the sofa and unzipped it. Piece by piece, I began folding her clothes. The silk blouses, the sequined dresses, the shoes that probably cost more than my entire month's pension. Each item went into the suitcase with deliberate care, as if I were packing a gift to be returned to its rightful owner. My hands didn't tremble, my heart didn't race. For the first time in months, I felt control slipping back into my grasp. I heard Savannah's laughter echo from the kitchen, a cruel, careless sound. She thought she had me beaten down, that I would never stand up for myself. But she didn't know me, not really. She didn't know the woman who had survived grief, who had raised a son alone, who had held classrooms full of restless teenagers together with nothing but sheer will. She didn't know that once I decided on something, nothing could move me. As I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound was sharp, final. I straightened my back and whispered to myself, "You can tell me to leave all you want, but the one leaving will be you." The door creaked, and I turned to see Ethan standing in the hallway, watching me. His face was pale, conflicted, his mouth opening as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. He glanced at the suitcase, then at me, and then back down at the floor. His silence cut deeper than any insult. I said nothing to him. There was nothing left to say. His silence was his choice, and my actions were mine. The sound of the zipper closing on Savannah's suitcase must have carried farther than I thought. Within seconds, her voice pierced through the hallway, shrill and sharp, like glass shattering. "What are you doing with my things?" she screamed, storming into the living room. Her eyes landed on the packed suitcase, her face twisting with outrage. I didn't flinch. My hands were steady as I folded the last blouse and placed it neatly inside. "I thought I'd make things easier for you," I said calmly. "You told me I could leave if I didn't like living with you, but I think it's you who should start packing." Her breath caught for just a second before she unleashed a laugh, high-pitched and venomous. "You've finally lost it, haven't you? You're insane." She whipped around, eyes blazing, and yanked her phone from her pocket. I knew what was coming, but I stayed where I was, folding her silk scarf into a neat square. "Hello? 911? Her voice cracked as she dialed. "Please, you have to help me. My mother-in-law's having a breakdown. She's unstable. She's packing my things and threatening me. I don't feel safe." Her words flowed like a performance she had practiced 100 times. She pressed her hand to her chest, forcing her breath into trembling gasps as tears welled up instantly in her eyes. She was an actress, and the living room was her stage. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face pale, caught between disbelief and dread. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to defend me, but Savannah's glare silenced him before any sound escaped. He shifted his weight, rubbed the back of his neck, and said nothing. His silence weighed heavier than her accusations. I tucked the scarf into the suitcase and zipped the pocket closed, ignoring her theatrics. My composure only seemed to enrage her more. She stomped her foot like a child denied a toy, shouting louder for the benefit of the emergency operator on the other end. "She's delusional! She doesn't know what she's doing! Please hurry before she hurts herself or me!" The unfairness of it burned through me, but I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Instead, I adjusted the suitcase and sat down in the armchair across from her. "I'm perfectly fine," I said, my voice steady, though it was clear she wasn't speaking to me anymore. She was speaking to the police who would arrive any minute, hoping to brand me as unstable in my own home. Ethan lingered in the corner, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I looked at him, searching for even a flicker of the boy I had raised, the one who used to hug me tightly after nightmares. But all I saw was a man too weak to stand up to his wife, trapped in her storm. Savannah ended the call with a dramatic sob, collapsing onto the couch as if the weight of my existence had broken her. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, then looked at me with a victorious sneer. "They'll be here soon, and when they see what you've done, you'll be the one leaving this house. For good." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "We'll see about that." The clock ticked on the mantel, each second echoing in the tense silence that filled the room. Savannah sat upright, rehearsing her role as the wounded victim. Ethan shifted uneasily, staring at the floor. And I, calm and steady, waited. When the sound of sirens finally reached my ears, I didn't panic. I reached for the small recorder nestled safely in my cardigan pocket. It had captured every cruel word, every lie, every insult she thought she could hurl without consequence. She didn't know it yet, but I was ready. The sirens faded as the patrol car stopped in front of the estate. Moments later, the heavy thud of boots echoed through the entryway. 2 officers stepped inside, calm but firm, their eyes scanning the room. Savannah sprang to her feet instantly, rushing toward them with a shaky cry. "Thank God you're here," she exclaimed, clutching her robe tighter around her shoulders. "My mother-in-law, she's been unstable, packing my things, threatening me. Please, you have to do something before she hurts herself, or me." I stayed seated in the armchair, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "Officers," I said evenly, "I assure you, I am perfectly fine." One officer nodded politely. The other glanced toward Savannah, clearly unsure of who to believe. Then came the footsteps of someone else, slower, deliberate, rehearsed. A tall man in a pressed suit entered the room, carrying a leather briefcase. His salt and pepper hair was combed meticulously, his glasses perched low on his nose. He looked at me with false familiarity. "Dr. Randall Pierce," he announced smoothly. "I'm Mrs. Monroe's psychiatrist." My brows lifted, though I said nothing. I had never seen this man before in my life. He turned to the officers with a grave expression. "I've been treating her for some time now. She's mentioned memory issues, confusion, paranoia. It's not unusual for her to act out like this." Savannah let out a theatrical sob, nodding vigorously. "See? I told you. She's been slipping for months. I was so scared when she started packing my things." The officers exchanged a glance, their suspicion now leaning toward me. Randall stepped closer, adjusting his glasses as if to emphasize his authority. "Mrs. Monroe," he said in a practiced tone, "do you know what day it is today?" I held his gaze, steady and unyielding. "Of course I do. It's Tuesday, the 21st of May. It's exactly 11:14 a.m. The clock on the mantel can confirm it." The younger officer's eyebrows shot up. Randall hesitated, his composure faltering for just a moment. "And do you know where you are?" he pressed. I smiled faintly. "In my home, the house I own outright, the one my late husband and I purchased in 1985 after saving every penny from decades of teaching and construction work." The silence stretched thin. Savannah shifted uncomfortably, her fake tears momentarily drying. Randall cleared his throat, clearly unprepared for my clarity. "Mrs. Monroe," he tried again, "sometimes patients like yourself can mask their symptoms. Do you recall our last appointment?" I leaned forward slightly, my eyes narrowing. "No, because we never had one. I don't know you. And if you're going to impersonate a doctor, you should at least bother to be convincing." The officer stiffened, turning toward Randall. His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, I continued, my voice sharp and unwavering. "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune." I recited the Hamlet soliloquy with deliberate precision, my voice carrying through the room. Every word was crisp, undeniable proof of my memory and clarity. When I finished, the silence was absolute. Randall's face reddened. Savannah's mouth hung open. Ethan stood frozen in the corner, shifting from one foot to the other like a boy caught sneaking candy. Finally, I looked at the officers. "Does that sound like the rambling of a woman losing her mind?" The older officer shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am, it doesn't." Randall opened his briefcase, fumbling as though searching for papers, but his hands shook. One of the officers stepped closer. "Doctor, could we see your credentials?" For the first time since he entered, Randall's smooth facade cracked. He hesitated too long, and in that hesitation the room shifted. Suspicion was no longer aimed at me. It was aimed squarely at him. Savannah sputtered, her voice rising in pitch. "Don't you see? She's manipulating you. She does this all the time." But the words rang hollow now. The air had changed. The officers were no longer buying her performance. I folded my hands again, calm as ever. "I told you, I am fine, but I'm beginning to wonder about the people around me." Ethan dropped his gaze to the floor, shame clouding his features. Savannah clenched her fists, her plan unraveling before her eyes. The officers stood taller, the weight of the moment settling in. For the first time in a long while, I felt the scales tipping back in my favor. Just as the tension in the room thickened to the point of breaking, the front door swung open with a confidence that didn't ask permission. Every head turned as a woman in a tailored navy suit stepped inside, a leather brief tucked under her arm. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate, commanding. "Helena Brooks," she announced, her voice firm and steady. "Mrs. Monroe's estate attorney." Relief spread through me like warmth on a cold day. I hadn't called her this morning, but Helena was the kind of woman who always seemed to appear when she was needed most. We had been friends for decades, and she had handled all the legal matters after my husband passed away. If anyone could cut through the lies, it was her. Randall straightened his posture, trying to regain his composure. "And you are?" he asked, his voice dripping with false authority. Helena fixed him with a piercing look. "I just told you. I'm Mrs. Monroe's attorney, and you, Dr. Pierce, have some explaining to do." Savannah's head whipped toward him. "You know him?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Helena set her brief on the coffee table and pulled out a crisp folder. She flipped it open with precision and slid a document toward the officers. According to the State Medical Board, Randall Pierce's license to practice psychiatry was suspended 18 months ago for insurance fraud and falsifying patient records. He is not a practicing psychiatrist. He is not authorized to treat anyone, and he has no business being here. The room went silent, except for the rustle of papers as one officer took the document, scanning it carefully. The other officer's gaze snapped back to Randall, harder now, less forgiving. Randall sputtered, reaching for his glasses as if that might steady his unraveling facade. That's not correct. There must be some mistake." Helena didn't flinch. "There's no mistake. I have the official ruling right here, complete with signatures from the review board. Would you like me to read it aloud?" Savannah's face drained of color, her act collapsing in real time. She turned on him with fury. "You told me you were licensed. You said you could handle this." Randall tried to backpedal, his words tumbling. His pate. I was just trying to help." The officer cut him off. "Sir, we'll need to verify your identification. Please stay where you are." Savannah's voice rose in panic. "This isn't fair. You don't understand. She's dangerous. She's been—" Helena raised her hand, silencing her with a sharp glance. "The only danger here is the danger to Mrs. Monroe's rights and property. Savannah, you've been living in this home rent-free for nearly a year, using her resources, and now you're conspiring with a man who's lost his license to practice medicine. Do you really want to keep talking?" Ethan stood frozen, eyes darting between his wife and the attorney. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to find his footing in the chaos. Savannah clenched her fists, her carefully built world beginning to shake. "You can't prove anything," she hissed. Helena leaned closer, her tone low but cutting. "I don't have to prove it. The state of California already did." The younger officer folded the document and tucked it into his folder. "Ma'am," he said to Savannah, "we'll need to hear your full account, but this changes things." The room had shifted. No longer was I the frail, unstable widow they wanted to paint me as. With Helena's arrival, the narrative had turned on its head. Savannah's act had cracks, and those cracks were widening fast. I caught Helena's eye and offered her the smallest nod of gratitude. She returned it with the faintest smile, as if to say, "Don't worry, Lillian, we're just getting started." The air in the living room was different now, charged with suspicion but also possibility. The officers had taken a step back, no longer circling me like a fragile liability, but watching Savannah and Randall with new eyes. Helena didn't waste a second. She placed another folder on the table, this one thicker, its edges worn from handling. "Mrs. Monroe," she said clearly, though her eyes flicked toward the officers. "There's something you should know about your daughter-in-law, something the authorities will find very relevant." Savannah stiffened. "Don't you dare," she hissed. Helena ignored her, opening the folder and sliding out 2 sets of documents. Savannah Monroe has been married before, twice, in fact, to much older men. Both marriages ended the same way, tragically short, Both men passed away under questionable circumstances, and in both cases, the estates transferred directly to Savannah. The words struck like lightning. Ethan's face drained of color as he turned toward his wife, eyes wide. "Savannah, is this true?" She crossed her arms, chin lifted defiantly. "So what if it is? People die. That doesn't make me a criminal." Helena's tone sharpened. "It makes you a pattern, a dangerous one." She tapped the papers for emphasis. The first husband died within a year of marriage. The second lasted just under 2 years, and each time Savannah inherited homes, accounts, and investments. Not millions, but enough to give her a taste, enough to motivate her to repeat the cycle. The officers leaned closer, their pens scratching against notepads as they took notes. Savannah's composure faltered, her eyes darting toward Ethan as though daring him to stand with her. But Ethan looked sick, his hand clutching the back of the chair for balance. "You told me you'd only been married once before," he whispered. "You lied." Savannah shot him a withering glare. "I lied because you wouldn't understand. I had to survive. I did what I had to do." Her words hung heavy in the room. Survival. That was her justification. Not love, not partnership. Survival at the expense of others. Helena pulled one more document from the folder. "And if survival was the goal, then this makes a lot more sense." She held up a prescription slip. "This was found in this kitchen drawer of this very home. A sedative, commonly used to cause extreme drowsiness when mixed with alcohol or coffee, strong enough to impair judgment, make someone sign papers they'd never otherwise agree to." The color drained from Ethan's face as he stared at the slip. "Savannah, what is this?" Savannah's voice sharpened, her defenses rising. "That doesn't prove anything. It's just paper. Anyone could have put it there." I stepped forward now, my voice steady but laced with steel. "Funny, isn't it? Because I've been feeling unusually tired after my morning coffee lately. But I thought it was just age catching up with me. Turns out it wasn't age at all." Savannah's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting wildly as the walls began to close in. The officers exchanged another look, one of them murmuring quietly to the other. Suspicion was no longer a shadow. It was a storm forming right above her head. Ethan sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What have you been doing?" Savannah glared at Helena, fury blazing in her eyes. "You think you're clever, dragging up my past, but you have nothing concrete, nothing to tie me to anything here." Helena met her gaze coolly. "We'll see about that, because patterns have a way of speaking louder than lies." And in that moment, I felt the tide turning. For the first time since this ordeal began, Savannah wasn't steering the narrative. I was. With Helena by my side and the officers beginning to doubt her every word, Savannah's carefully built facade was beginning to fracture. The room was electric with tension, the kind that made every breath heavy. Savannah sat rigid on the edge of the sofa, her arms folded, her eyes darting from Helena to the officers like a cornered animal. Ethan hadn't moved from his chair, his hands still covering part of his face, as if shielding himself from the truth pressing down around him. I stood slowly, my cardigan pocket heavy with the recorder I had hidden there earlier. My heart pounded, but my voice was calm, steady, almost cold. "Savannah, you've done a lot of talking about me, about my supposed instability, about how I'm old and confused. But I think it's time we let your own words do the talking." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you babbling about?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black device. My thumb pressed the button, and suddenly the living room filled with the echo of her mocking voice from earlier that morning. "If you don't like living with us, leave." The words spilled from the recorder, crystal clear, undeniable. Savannah's face went pale as the officers turned toward her, eyebrows raised. I pressed again, and another snippet played, her laughter, her dismissive tone. "You're old, Lillian. You should be grateful we're here to take care of you." The silence after was deafening. Savannah lunged forward, her hands outstretched. "Give me that!" I stepped back, holding the recorder high, my eyes never leaving hers. "Why? Afraid of what else it might reveal?" Her face twisted, and in her fury, she made the mistake I had been waiting for. "So what if I slipped something in your coffee?" she snapped. "It was harmless. Just a little something to make you relax, to make signing papers easier. You're impossible otherwise." The words tumbled out before she realized what she had admitted. Her eyes widened in horror, but it was too late. The officers froze, their expressions hardening instantly. Ethan's head snapped up, his face ashen. You drugged my mother?" His voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and devastation. Savannah stammered, backpedaling desperately. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean, it was just to calm her down. She gets so worked up." Helena cut in sharply, her voice slicing through the chaos. "You just confessed, Savannah, in front of witnesses, officers, and on record. That's not calming someone down. That's coercion. That's intent to defraud." Savannah turned to Ethan, desperation etched across her face. "Ethan, listen to me. She's twisting everything. You know I'd never hurt your mother." But Ethan looked shattered, his eyes glistening with tears. "I thought you loved me. I thought you wanted us to build a life together, not this." Savannah's mask crumbled as panic spread. "I did it for us. Don't you see? With the estate secured, we could have had everything. We wouldn't have to worry about money, about anything. I did it for our future." Her words rang hollow, bouncing off the cold marble walls. The officers were no longer neutral. Their stance shifted, their pens scribbling furiously across their notepads. Helena folded her arms, her gaze sharp, victorious. I stood tall, the recorder still in my hand. "You underestimated me, Savannah. You thought I was just an old woman too weak to fight back. But you forgot one thing. I've spent my whole life teaching people how to think, and I've been watching you from the very beginning." The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. For the first time, Savannah was stripped of her control, her lies unraveling in real time. The shock on Ethan's face, the scrutiny in the officer's eyes, and the steady strength in Helena's presence, all of it painted the picture Savannah had tried so hard to prevent. This wasn't my breakdown. This was her unraveling. The moment Savannah's reckless confession echoed through the room, the officers' attitudes shifted completely. One of them stepped aside, speaking into his radio in a low, urgent tone. The other remained fixed on Savannah, his eyes narrowing with each word she tried to claw back. The house no longer felt like a stage for her performance. It felt like a crime scene. Helena didn't waste time. She gathered her folders, her voice crisp and deliberate. "This has gone far beyond a domestic dispute. I've seen enough patterns in Savannah's history to know she's not working alone. We need to escalate this to the proper authorities." "Proper authorities?" Savannah spat, her face red. "She's your client. You're just trying to protect her." Helena ignored the outburst and pulled her phone from her blazer pocket. She stepped into the hallway, speaking quickly, her words sharp and clipped. I caught only fragments. Fraudulent marriages, coerced signatures, controlled substances. When she returned, her expression was steel. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, turning to me, "I've contacted a federal investigator I trust. He's handled cases like this before. If Savannah is connected to something larger, he'll find out." Savannah's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "You can't call the FBI. This isn't federal." But minutes later, the sound of another car pulling into the driveway silenced her protests. A tall man in a dark suit stepped through the doorway, his badge flashing as he introduced himself. "Marcus Hayes, Federal Bureau of Investigation." His voice carried the weight of authority, calm but commanding. He looked at me first, offering a small nod. "Mrs. Monroe, I'll need to ask you some questions." "Of course," I said, my voice steady. For the first time in months, I felt like someone believed me. Marcus wasted no time. He spread out papers on the coffee table, pulling files from a slim briefcase. "We've been tracking a network of fraudulent schemes targeting elderly homeowners across several states. The pattern is disturbingly consistent. Wealthy widows or retirees pressured, coerced, or tricked into signing over assets. The methods vary, but the players are the same." Savannah's hands tightened into fists. "This is ridiculous." I don't know anything about that. Marcus's eyes met hers briefly, cold and unreadable, before returning to the documents. Phone records tell a different story. He slid a printed log across the table, pointing to highlighted entries. You've been in frequent contact with a number registered to what we believe is a placement coordinator, a recruiter who identifies vulnerable households and matches them with so-called advisors, caretakers, or spouses who can exploit them. Ethan leaned forward, his face pale as he stared at the log. Savannah, is this true? Who were you talking to? She snapped back, her voice shrill. It's none of your business. They were friends, just friends. Marcus remained unshaken. One of those friends is already under investigation in Nevada. Another is facing charges in Texas. And now, Mrs. Monroe's estate shows up as a target in California. That doesn't look like coincidence. The room went still, every eye trained on Savannah. She shifted uncomfortably, her confidence crumbling with each word Marcus laid down. Helena stepped closer, her tone calm but cutting. You see, Savannah, this isn't just about you and me anymore. This is about a multi-state operation. And now, with your little confession about drugging coffee and your phone records, you've tied yourself directly into it. Savannah shook her head furiously, her voice trembling now. No, I didn't know it was that big. They told me it was just helping with connections, just an introduction, nothing else. Ethan buried his face in his hands again. His voice came out cracked, broken. My God, Savannah, what have you dragged us into? Marcus gathered the papers, his voice steady. We're not done yet. There's more to uncover here, and I intend to find out exactly how deep this runs. And for the first time, I saw fear in Savannah's eyes. Not the fake tears she conjured at will, but real fear. Fear that the walls she had built around her schemes were closing in fast. The FBI agent's presence alone was enough to shift the balance of power. But when Marcus Hayes gave a subtle nod to the officers, the room erupted into motion. One of them stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Savannah Monroe, he said firmly, you're under arrest for suspicion of fraud, coercion, and attempted abuse of a vulnerable adult. Savannah's shriek filled the air as the cold metal clicked around her wrists. You can't do this! You don't understand! I'm the victim here! She twisted, her hair falling loose from its immaculate bun, eyes wild as she scanned the room for someone, anyone, to take her side. But no one moved. Ethan sat frozen on the sofa, his face ghostly pale. His wife, the woman he thought he loved, was being led toward the door, and he couldn't even stand up. His silence was louder than any words. For a brief, glorious moment, I felt the weight I had carried for months begin to lift. The officers guiding Savannah out of my house, her voice cracking into desperate sobs, was like watching the chains fall away. My estate, my dignity, my life. They all felt as if they might finally be safe again. Ethan finally looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. Mom. His voice was hoarse, almost childlike. I swear, I didn't know. I didn't know what she was doing. I thought she just needed time, that things would get better. I never wanted any of this. I stared at him. The boy I had raised. The man who had become a stranger under Savannah's shadow. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to believe him. Another part knew that silence can be as damning as words. You stood by, I said quietly. You watched it happen. Tears welled in his eyes. I was weak. I thought keeping the peace was better than fighting. I was wrong. I'll make it right, Mom, please. Just give me the chance. I didn't answer, not then. My heart was torn between disappointment and the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be redeemed. But the fragile sense of victory shattered only hours later. Marcus had left to coordinate further investigation, promising that the evidence would hold. Helena stayed by my side, reassuring me that Savannah's arrest was the turning point we had been fighting for. Yet as dusk settled over the estate, headlights flashed in the driveway. A sleek black car pulled up, and a sharply dressed man stepped out, briefcase in hand. Savannah's lawyer. Within an hour, she was back inside my home, her wrists free, her expression smug once more. She sauntered into the living room as if nothing had happened, brushing her hair back into place, her confidence fully restored. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "A few little accusations and I'd be gone? Please. I have people far more powerful than you on my side." The pit in my stomach returned with full force. The officers had no choice but to step aside. With her lawyer's paperwork and promises of cooperation, Savannah was temporarily free. Helena's jaw tightened, her fists clenched at her sides. "Don't get too comfortable," she warned. "This isn't over." But Savannah only smiled, a cold, poisonous smile. "Oh, it's far from over. You'll see." My brief moment of triumph, that spark of justice, had been smothered under her return. Hope had flickered, only to be doused in the cruelest way. And I knew then that the battle ahead would be far more dangerous than I had imagined. The night after Savannah returned with her lawyer at her side, the estate felt heavier than ever. She walked through the halls as if she owned them, humming to herself, making pointed remarks about changes she planned once things were settled. Ethan avoided my eyes, torn and broken, unable to stand against her, but unable to look at me either. I could feel my resolve hardening. I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I was fighting for every ounce of dignity they had tried to strip away. The next morning, Helena returned with Marcus Hayes. They spread out files across my dining table, papers full of names, addresses, and phone records. Marcus pointed to a highlighted entry. "We know Savannah isn't working alone. The calls she made tie directly to a recruiter we've had our eye on, someone who lures wealthy seniors into fraudulent financial schemes. If we can get her to bite, we'll have the evidence we need to take down the network she's connected to." Helena looked at me seriously. "Lillian, this is risky. They'll test you. They'll want to see if you're vulnerable. If you agree, we'll protect you every step of the way. But we need you to play along." I straightened my shoulders. "They think I'm weak. Let's give them the performance they want." That very afternoon, Marcus set the bait. A carefully crafted story was planted through channels Savannah and her friends were known to monitor. The story was simple. Lillian Monroe had recently come into $600,000 from a liquidated trust and was considering investment options. Vulnerable, alone, ripe for the picking. 2 days later, it worked. I was in the supermarket, pushing my cart past the produce section, when a woman with carefully styled blonde hair and a tailored blazer stepped into my path. Her smile was warm, too warm, the kind of smile that was rehearsed rather than genuine. "Mrs. Monroe? Oh, I've heard so much about you," she said smoothly, offering her hand. "My name is Diane. I actually specialize in helping people like you manage their financial future." I tilted my head, feigning surprise. "Is that so? Well, I suppose I could use a little advice. My husband always handled investments, and since he passed—" I let my voice trail off, just shaky enough to play the part of the uncertain widow. Diane's smile widened, and I could almost see the hunger in her eyes. "That's exactly why I'm here. You shouldn't have to carry that burden alone. I work with some of the most respected financial advisors in the region. In fact, I'd love to introduce you to one. His name is Robert Alden. Brilliant man, decades of experience. He has special programs for people who want to protect their assets." "Protect my assets?" I repeated softly, my fingers brushing the edge of the cart. "That does sound important. I wouldn't want to lose what I have left." She leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a precious secret. "Exactly. And with so much money sitting idle, it can make you a target. Robert specializes in keeping people safe from opportunists. I can set up a meeting this week, if you'd like." I forced a nervous little laugh. "Oh, I wouldn't want to rush. I've never been very good with numbers. But perhaps you're right. $600,000 just sitting in the bank does seem risky, doesn't it?" Her eyes lit up at the mention of the sum. She nodded eagerly. "It's not just risky, Mrs. Monroe. It's dangerous. Let me introduce you to Robert. You'll see how much better you'll feel with a professional guiding you." I placed a hand over hers, letting my expression soften into gratitude. "Thank you, Diane. I don't know what I'd do without kind people like you looking out for me." Inside, my blood burned at the charade. But outwardly, I played the role of the vulnerable widow perfectly. Because this time, I wasn't the one being played. This time, I was the bait. 2 days after my run-in with Diane, I found myself seated across from Robert Alden in the corner office of a high-rise downtown. The man looked every bit the part he was playing. Gray hair perfectly combed back, tailored suit, polished shoes, and a practiced smile that had probably convinced dozens of people before me to hand over everything they owned. His office was decorated with framed certificates, though I noticed none of them hung quite straight. Small details, but details that mattered. "Mrs. Monroe," he began warmly, sliding a glossy folder across the desk, "I want you to know you're in good hands. Diane told me a little about your situation, and let me say, you've done a remarkable job protecting your assets up until now. But with $600,000 sitting vulnerable, well," he gave a sympathetic shake of his head, "it's like leaving your front door wide open at night." I folded my hands neatly in my lap, giving him the look of a woman worried but eager for reassurance. "And what would you recommend?" His smile widened, teeth gleaming. "That's where our asset protection fund comes in. It's designed for clients exactly like you, widows, retirees, anyone who can't be expected to manage such complicated financial matters alone. All you'd need to do is transfer the funds into our secured account. We diversify, we shield, we handle everything. You'll sleep better knowing your money is safe." He spoke smoothly, each word polished like a sales pitch honed over years. I let him go on, nodding occasionally, pretending to be overwhelmed but grateful. He even placed a brochure in front of me, filled with charts and smiling stock images of silver-haired couples walking hand in hand on the beach. When he paused, waiting for me to bite, I leaned forward slightly, softening my voice. "It does sound comforting. But tell me, Mr. Alden, what company did you say this fund was registered under?" For the first time, a flicker crossed his face. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's a private fund, Mrs. Monroe. Very exclusive. We don't bother our clients with tedious paperwork." I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Oh, but surely you have registration documents? A license? Something from the state? My husband always told me never sign anything unless you can see the paperwork." Robert's hand twitched as he reached to adjust his cufflink. Of course. It's all in process. These things take time. But what matters is the security we provide. Clients trust us implicitly." I murmured, tapping the edge of the brochure with one finger. "You'll forgive me, but I taught high school literature for 35 years. I always told my students, if someone avoids answering your question, that's usually the answer. Do you understand?" The room stilled. His polished smile faltered, just for a second, but enough. I caught the flicker of irritation behind his eyes, the crack in the facade. Robert recovered quickly, leaning forward with forced enthusiasm. "Mrs. Monroe, I assure you, we've handled millions in funds without incident. You can trust me." I sat back, folding my arms gently. "Trust isn't given, Mr. Alden. It's earned. And I'm not in the habit of giving away what my husband and I built with a lifetime of work just because a stranger tells me to." For the first time since I walked in, Robert's confidence wavered. He fiddled with his pen, his voice a little sharper now. "You're overcomplicating this. Do you want to protect your money or not?" I smiled sweetly, tilting my head. "I do want to protect my money. That's exactly why I'm asking the questions." The silence that followed was delicious. He had expected an easy mark. Instead, he was looking at a woman who had no intention of being fooled again. And though I played the role of hesitant widow, my questions were cutting deep enough to make him sweat. The trap had been set. Robert thought he was luring me in, but every word, every hesitation, every nervous flick of his pen had been recorded by the FBI team stationed just outside. When I left his office, I knew it was only a matter of time before his polished mask shattered. But I wanted Savannah to see it with her own eyes. I wanted her to stand in the ruins of the empire she thought she was building. 2 days later, Helena and Marcus arranged it perfectly. Savannah was summoned to a meeting at the estate under the pretense that Robert needed her cooperation to finalize paperwork. She swept into the living room in one of her silk dresses, perfume trailing behind her, chin tilted high as though she were already mistress of the house. What she didn't expect was the sight before her. Through the wide windows, parked discreetly at the edge of the driveway, FBI agents moved in coordinated silence. And sitting at my dining table, Robert Alden was pale, sweating, and stammering as Marcus Hayes leafed through the fraudulent brochures he had given me. Savannah froze, her confidence faltering. What is this? I stood from my chair, facing her fully. This is the end of your game, Savannah. Every lie, every manipulation, every drop of poison you tried to feed me. It's all over. Your so-called advisor has been caught red-handed. Her face twisted, rage and fear battling in her eyes. You think this proves anything? He's just one man. This has nothing to do with me. I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to them. You've been working with him, with all of them, from the very beginning. But you made one mistake. You thought I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. Savannah's composure cracked. She lunged forward, her voice rising, venom spilling from her lips. You were supposed to be easy. That's why I married your son. Do you think I ever wanted Ethan? He was nothing but a means to get close to you, to this estate. He was weak, predictable, pathetic, and you were supposed to be even easier to break. The words rang out like gunfire, echoing through the house. My heart clenched, not for myself, but for the figure standing silently at the top of the stairs. Ethan. He had come down unnoticed, drawn by the noise, and now he stood frozen, his face ashen, his body trembling. Savannah. His voice cracked, hoarse with disbelief. Did you just say I was nothing to you? Savannah spun, her eyes widening when she realized he had heard everything. Ethan, no, you don't understand. I didn't mean it like that. But it was too late. The truth hung in the air, undeniable, poisonous. Ethan staggered back a step, his hand gripping the banister as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes glistened, tears threatening to spill. All this time, he whispered, his voice breaking. I defended you. I believed you. And you used me. You used me to destroy my own mother. Savannah reached for him, desperation clawing at her features. I did it for us, for our future. He pulled away as if her touch burned. No, you did it for yourself. And I let you. The silence that followed was electric, filled with the raw sound of betrayal finally laid bare. I stood tall, my chest heavy with both sorrow and vindication. Savannah's empire of lies had collapsed, and the wreckage had crushed the very person she thought she controlled. And for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of the sun I had raised in Ethan's eyes, not the weak shadow she had molded, but the man who finally realized the truth. The estate was silent, except for the low murmur of agents coordinating outside. Robert Alden sat at my dining table, pale and sweating, his hands shaking as he signed the forms Marcus slid across to him. Gone was the polished advisor with silver words. In his place was a man cornered, exposed, and desperate. Savannah paced behind him like a trapped animal, her eyes darting from the agents to the front door, as though she might still find an escape. Ethan sat slumped in the armchair, broken, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on him. Marcus's voice cut through the room, calm but merciless. Robert, you've got one chance to make this easier on yourself. You cooperate, you talk, and maybe you'll see a deal. Stay quiet, and you'll go down with the rest of them. Robert's jaw trembled. His eyes flicked to Savannah, then to me, and finally to the papers spread before him. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. It wasn't just me. It was never just me. Marcus leaned in. Then who? Robert swallowed hard, the words sticking in his throat. It's Celeste. Dr. Celeste Pierce. The name hit like a thunderclap. Helena's eyes narrowed. Randall's sister? Robert nodded miserably. She runs everything. Randall was small time, but Celeste, she's the one who built it. The marriages, the drugs, the asset funds, it's all her design. She's a licensed psychiatrist, untouchable on the surface. But behind the scenes, she's been orchestrating schemes across the country. $50 million, maybe more. She's the reason Savannah was placed here. The room erupted in disbelief. The officers muttered, scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Ethan lifted his head, horror etched across his face. You mean Savannah was working with her all along? Savannah spun on him, panic flooding her voice. No! Ethan, don't listen to him. He's just trying to save himself. But Robert's words spilled faster now, like a dam breaking. She told Savannah exactly what to do. Find a wealthy widow, get inside the house, use Ethan as leverage. The drugs, the staged breakdown, even me coming here. It was all her plan. Savannah was following orders. The air in the room grew heavy. Savannah's lips trembled, her bravado collapsing under the weight of Robert's confession. He's lying, she whispered, though the conviction was gone from her voice. Marcus stood tall, his presence filling the space. We've been chasing this network for years, and now we have a name, a respected doctor, a woman hiding behind her credentials while she exploits families and destroys lives. He turned to the agents at the door. Get this man in custody. Secure every document in this house. We're pulling the whole operation apart tonight. The agents moved swiftly. Robert's wrists were bound in cuffs, his shoulders slumping as they let him out. Savannah tried to follow, her voice rising in a desperate shriek. You can't take him! He's lying! He's the liar, not me! But no one listened. I stood in the center of the living room, the truth reverberating through me. It wasn't just Savannah. It wasn't just Robert or Randall. It was bigger, deeper, darker than I had imagined. And yet, here in my own home, the web was unraveling. Savannah collapsed onto the couch, her silk dress wrinkling under her weight. She looked smaller now, stripped of the power she had flaunted for so long. Ethan didn't move to comfort her. He couldn't. He just stared at her with empty eyes, the last threads of loyalty finally severed. Helena placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice steady but fierce. It's over, Lillian. The truth is out. But as the agents filed out with Robert, I knew this was only the beginning, because the name Celeste Pierce was no longer hidden, and once her mask fell, the entire empire of deceit would collapse with her. The weeks that followed were a storm of headlines, hearings, and handcuffs. The FBI moved fast once Robert gave them Celeste's name. News outlets across the country carried the story of the Pierce Network, a fraudulent empire that had preyed on widows, retirees, and the vulnerable for over a decade. One by one, their operatives were rounded up. Bank accounts were frozen, shell companies dismantled, and victims finally told they weren't alone. For the first time in months, my estate was quiet again. No shrill voices echoing down the halls, no fake smiles around my breakfast table, just the hum of life as it used to be. My roses bloomed brighter that season, or maybe I simply noticed them again. I could walk into my kitchen without feeling like a stranger in my own home. Ethan came to me one afternoon, his eyes swollen with shame. He stood in the same kitchen where Savannah had once told me to leave and whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I let her control me. I let her turn me against you. I don't know how to make it right." I looked at him for a long moment, the boy I raised and the man he had become. He had stood by silently while I suffered, but he had also broken free the moment truth shattered his illusions. "You start," I said gently, "by remembering who you are, and by never forgetting who stood by you when you were too afraid to stand by yourself." Tears rolled down his cheeks, and for the first time in years, he embraced me with the same desperation he once had as a child. It didn't erase the pain, but it was a beginning. Later, Helena arranged for me to speak on camera. The FBI wanted a statement to share with other victims, a beacon of hope for those still afraid. The lights were bright, the microphones intimidating, but I stood tall in my own living room, dressed simply, my hands folded in front of me. I was told to leave my own home if I didn't like the way things were, I began, my voice steady, echoing the line that had started it all. But this is my home, my life, my estate. And no one, no manipulative spouse, no fake doctor, no fraudulent advisor, will ever take that away from me again. I own my life, my estate, and my dignity. I am nobody's victim. The room fell silent as the cameras clicked off, but the weight of the words lingered in the air. Helena's eyes shone with pride. Marcus gave me a firm nod, and Ethan, standing quietly in the corner, looked at me as if he were seeing his mother for the very first time. When the crew left, I returned to my garden. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, red petals glowing against the fading light. I knelt to touch the soil, grounding myself in the place my husband and I had built, with love and perseverance. Savannah's laughter no longer haunted these halls. Robert's slick words no longer poisoned the air. Celeste's empire had fallen, and I, Lillian Monroe, had reclaimed everything they tried to take from me. The estate stood as more than a house. It was a testament to survival, to truth, to the quiet but unbreakable strength of a woman who refused to be erased. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered into the stillness, "This is my life, and it will always be mine."